We're now going to welcome a couple more people into the panel. We've got Leandro Finol, the Executive Director of the Idea Center at Miami Dade College, Rebecca Fishman Lipsey, CEO of Radical Partners and a member of the State Board of Education, and Natalia Napoleon de Bens, the co-founder of Lemon City Co. Nice job.
That was good.
Leandro, I want to begin with you. We were talking backstage about the three pillars of the Idea Center, and one of them that you mentioned was culture. And I'm interested in culture because it's obviously important, but it's also a very squishy word. And I was wondering if you can help us think more concretely about what it actually means.
Thank you. I completed my PhD in anthropology, so I know very well. No,
Good.
just kidding. Okay. So culture, I think, is the defining factor of organizations. And it's what every CEO think that their employees understand, but they don't really understand. So every company has kind of core values, but most of them are like in a drawer and not in the call center. So I guess the challenge for startups is how to make those values permeate throughout the organization. That's the difference between the talkers and the doers, and that's what I think.
Rebecca, we were also talking about some of your theories, and I believe the third hiring theory you have, I think I got the number right, was no assholes. And the interesting thing about no assholes is that it seems to fly directly in the face of lots of evidence we have that there are a lot of very successful tech people who are assholes, but nonetheless are incredibly instrumental to helping their companies move forward and help give non-assholes jobs. So when you say no assholes, what do you mean, and how sure are you that a company can't withstand a little bit of an asshole?
Yeah, so it's true. There are a lot of really talented assholes out there. There are many talented ones. And you have to ask yourself, as a founder of a growing organization, how many do I have room for in my company? Am I one? And if I am, is there room for another one? And there are also many talented people who are not assholes. And I would encourage a founder of a growing organization that wants to scale, find someone who's not an asshole.
All right, we have time. Natalia, you don't work full-time on your startup. And when we were talking about why, you said because it's really risky to go full-time into a startup.
Right.
I mean, I think like risk is such an important part of this idea. I mean, it's unbelievably lonely and unbelievably stressful to be starting something on your own. Can you tell me a little bit about your thought process and why you haven't gone full-time?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think there's a time and a place for everything, and we're very new. I mean, we launched late last year. It's something that we definitely talk about every day, like which one is going to be...
Say a little bit about what your company does, too.
Sure. Well, Lemon City, we focus on Miami-inspired blends. So we take traditional tea leaves and blend them with ingredients that we love from all over Latin America and the Caribbean.
Great. Jim, you're sort of here.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I want to cheat out, as they say in theater. In Peter Thiel's book, he said that a secret is something that somebody thinks that you expect not other people agree with you about. And I'm interested in whether you have a secret to hiring well, something that you think, a theory that you have that you think most people disagree with you about.
Wow. Probably the most controversial thing about my hiring practice, this is just personal, is that I recognize that I can't tell when people are lying to me. And I spent years developing techniques to sort of out them on job interviews. And I can actually do that, but all I've done is proven that certain people are better liars than others on job interviews. What I can't do is figure it out in real time. So I've given up this idea of trying to vet people in real time. What I tell them is this. I said, look, because I lack the ability to filter at the front end, I have developed a phenomenal ability to fire you if you are lying. It's the compensatory skill.
Right.
And so this has a repercussion. I say, look, here's the deal. I'm going to now do something that's totally weird, and I'm going to tell you every reason you don't want to work for this organization. Patty, is Patty here? Patty's in the room? Yeah, if Patty's in the room. I grilled her. She was going to come work for me, and like the first day, I was like, here's 10 reasons why you don't want to work with me. And they were totally
Is that
brutal.
true? Give me a nod. Yep, okay, there she is.
Yeah, totally honest. And then I said, look, if one of these is a deal breaker for you, you know it now. And you know that I will fire you if it doesn't work. So,
What do people lie to you about?
oh, all sorts of stuff. You know, like here's a great one. I like working with people. Maybe you don't. Maybe, like, we just hired a guy at the glass studio where we work. Phenomenal technician. He hated people. He genuinely did. He didn't like people. We had to get rid of him. But he didn't tell us on the job interview. He's like, oh, I've been lonely in my little, he sailed by himself to Hawaii, right?
This is a question for the panel. There is, that is a fairly antisocial thing to do. There is a sense, I think, that some tech people aren't people. That a part of the joy is getting inside your own head. You said yourself that sometimes you're so locked in the hippocampus that you forget if you're wearing the same pair of socks. Is this a problem that for those of you who have experience hiring both in tech and outside of tech, is this a tech problem, the people person problem?
You cannot generalize. You have the PayPal mafia where you had Musk, Thiel, that you mentioned, and Heitman working together. So it is possible. A people hire A people, B people hire C people. So I'd rather have you as an A founder hiring A team.
Right, we see the same thing with social ventures, and it's not quite the same with tech, but the similarity we see is just because you're a really good founder doesn't mean you're going to be a really good CEO. And just because you're a really good inventor doesn't mean you're going to be a really good executive director. So you need to ask yourself if, when you're ready to grow, you want to hire yourself for the role.
And similar with us, I mean, when we're in the sales business, you can be great, at a bar or at a restaurant talking to people, but actually hard selling a product is a totally different skill set. And so being able to communicate and maintain the same personality that draws people to you in the first place when you're also trying to get them to buy something from you is it's interesting because it's difficult to find that right mix.
Sure, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I have the solution for him because I'm terrible at interviewing, So I think if you give them a project for a month, you'll know. Is this guy or a woman ready to work for this organization long term? Great solution if you can do it.
Right. All right, so my roommates are software developers. They're building an app that helps send money from immigrants who live here to overseas. They started as 2, now they're 15. And one of the biggest problems that I've seen with them is it's not quite a paradox, but I'll call it sort of the paradox of familiarity, which is that on the one hand, people talk about fit. Right? People talk about someone who comes in and they already embody the culture of the company. They don't need any ramp-up education to be a team member. On the other hand, one of the most popular pieces of advice is don't hire yourself. So on the one hand, you have these 2 pillars. Don't hire someone who's just like you. Hire someone who believes everything very deeply that you believe. How do you navigate the fact that these 2 things are going sometimes and one person going to run counter to each other?
I mean, first of all, Rebecca and I were talking earlier about values. I mean, values are important, and knowing that the people that you bring on board have the same core values, work ethic, the same sort of drive are important, and that's, I think, key.
Yeah, underline everything she said, and you already have what you bring to the table. And so you don't need more of what you bring to the table. You need something that is not already there.
I agree with that, but at the same time, one of the first things we mentioned was the PayPal mafia. How many women were in the PayPal mafia? How many people who weren't white were in the PayPal mafia? How many people who didn't graduate from a school in California were in the PayPal mafia?
Illinois.
Or was it Illinois at the time? So it's on the one hand, we have this truism of hiring. Don't hire yourself. And on the other hand, the paradigm example of a successful starting team seems to be a lot of people who are unbelievably similar to each other.
Well, look, in the startup phase, you're hiring different people than ultimately you're going to have in the culture. In the startup phase, you're hiring Swiss Army knives. Okay, they have the blades, and they have the bottle opener and the corkscrew, and if you're lucky, that little toothpick, right? Because you have these things like we have to do HR, and nobody's doing HR because we're 5 guys. So you hire these generalists, and you hire people who generally respect the values of the organization and are a cultural fit because you can communicate with them more easily. So if somebody sort of speaks my language, then I have an easier job as a manager communicating with them. But as the organization grows, you then quickly have to sort of transition from that to a more structured system. Otherwise, you'll have this sort of amorphous chaos.
You wanted to say something?
I
Yeah.
agree with Jim. For startups, you need basically two skills. Discovery skills for design and product market fit, and then delivery skills on execution. So I don't think it is that important if you're white or African American or Latino, but you have to make sure that at least those two skills are covered by the team, discovery and delivery.
Right. I do want to ask about experience. You know, one of the things that you guys have uncovered, you've sort of gotten around the fact that employers are looking for people that have already been employed in the thing they want to ask them to do. And a program like yours gives off a sort of signaling mechanism. It says we will vouch for these people. So instead of experience, you have a signal. Lots of startups are doing things that haven't been done before. They're trying to start something new. And so sometimes it's going to be impossible to find someone that has that particular experience because you're creating that company. How do you interview your way around that fact?
Yeah, you need to hire for learners. Even if you know what the job description is for the people you want to hire, 3 months down the road, the environment changes, and all of a sudden the person you hired, it doesn't have the exact skills that are necessary.
But how do you do that?
So what you're looking for is the ability to navigate like a complex environment where something all of a sudden changes, and that motivates you, and you get excited. And so, for example, I'll ask people at an interview things like, I'm going to give you a paper cup, what would you do with it? And I'm not looking for someone to say I'm going to fill it with water. I want to see someone who has the ability in a creative environment to do lots of different things with
One of the interesting things, you know, Google did this for a long time. Google had sort of its games and its puzzles that it would ask people, and actually they came to the conclusion a year ago that this was very good at hiring one specific kind of person. It was good at hiring software developers who were working alone. So people who, I think of everything in sort of sports analogies, because that's just, I guess, where my head goes. It's very easy to pick a 7'1" basketball player and say, you'll be a good rebounder, because his height's not going to change when he becomes a professional basketball player. But almost every other person on the team is playing off somebody else, and the chemistry is constantly going to change. So I wonder, you know, how you have found these sort of games to be useful for predicting people's capability to think abstractly and learn?
Yes, and another place where I saw this done really well was over at Teach for America. So I used to run the chapter for Teach for America locally. There's a bunch of folks in the room who did it as well. And that was as well a really important quality that you needed to have. You're going to be placed in an environment that may be foreign to you with students who are facing lots of challenges, and you need to be able, in the face of challenges, to stand up and do whatever it takes, regardless. And so they have a series of questions that they look for at their interviews, and it's not games as much as it is like real scenarios, and what would you do? And now here's a challenge, and now what would you do?
Hypotheticals. I love those because I think it gives you some insight into how someone thinks without having them necessarily do a puzzle. I think I agree with you that it is a particular skill set that does well in that sort of environment. But I think operating or interviewing in a hypothetical style, giving them sort of real world scenarios and just seeing how they think. Sometimes there's not even necessarily a right answer. You're just trying to understand their approach. I love those, and I've always liked being interviewed in that way, and I also interview in that style.
Jim, do you think it's possible to, in an interview, figure out somebody's capacity to learn, or do you think you have to ask questions that get around it and can just barely suggest it?
I don't know. I mean, I can't say that anything's impossible. I've just said that I've never done it successfully, consistently. I occasionally do it and then I credit myself, but in most cases I think that's just getting lucky.
Lucky, yeah.
Right? So what I have done, and I'm very interested in this, I've overhired, and that's an interesting thing. So let's say you've got a job that's not that interesting, okay? And you hire somebody who just kills it on the interview, and you put them in this job that's not terribly interesting. So I'll give you a concrete example. I have a glass studio. We have a guy that basically cleans the place and runs a cash register, and it's not a particularly glorious job, but he also has to greet customers. So there is some social component. And we hired this guy who was not very bright. He worked for 6 months and literally made every single mistake he could make. And I wanted to get rid of him after like 2 months. My partner was like, no, I got to give him a try. And after 6 months, I'd had it. I was like, look, he just did this wrong, and he did this wrong, and he did this wrong. But this guy had two redeeming qualities. One, he knew he wasn't very bright, and he had mechanisms to cope for it. He'd been dealing with this his whole life, okay? So he had these great coping mechanisms. And secondly, he was like a super friendly, nice guy. And I couldn't get over the fact that he wasn't creative, but it turns out part of his job was to clean 3 bathrooms every day. And after 6 months, after making all these mistakes, right when I was about to fire him and my partner was about to go along with it, he stopped making the mistakes because he didn't repeat a mistake. Like, he'd make a mistake, he was like, don't mop
ticking every mistake box
don't mop a
within learning.
floor before a dance. You wouldn't think about that. We have shiny floors. It's deadly, right? We have people, it was, yeah, but you know, he doesn't do that anymore. He just wrote it down. And after that, he was phenomenal. He was phenomenal. So I was so moved at the car wash because I've got some friends who are, in that situation. And like, if you're autistic, cleaning is great stuff. And so you can overhire. And I think one of the emphasis we place on this sort of, ninja interviewing techniques is to equip us to overhire. And I was wondering, have you guys ever?
My personal opinion is that in 3 or 4 years, we're not going to have this conversation. The process has too many holes. It's too subjective. I think data science will have to improve the way that we interview prospects that at least give us a great filter. Not every Netflix recommendation is good, but at least you have a trend there. And I think new solutions will come.
Great. We've got one more comment, and then we have about 8 minutes left for questions.
Yeah, I think you're getting at something interesting as well, which is it's not all about the hiring process. Part of it is about what your culture is and how you're orienting around failure. And that the best way to learn as an employee and the best way for you to make a space where someone can be a really good learner is for you to really invite failure and to allow people to do things and learn from them and make mistakes and for it to be okay.
Great, thanks. Do we have questions from the audience? Where are our runners? Right here.
Hi, my name is Marcela Gutierrez, and I'm an evaluator. That's how I make a living. And I hear a lot of people talking about the things you do, but I haven't heard much about your impact. And I have a question for, is it Jim, the Launchpad guy? So, how would I know that the people that go through your Launchpad interventions or programs or whatever you want to call it, are better prepared than anybody who came from one of those 5 other places in St. Louis that do the same thing? How are your hires different? And what kind of data do you have to show to me that if I go through you, I'm going to be better prepared to keep my job, to do better, to be promoted? In other words, what's your data?
So our data is whether or not they keep the job. So the people we place are people who are not currently working as programmers. So our success metric is, do they get hired full-time? And 90% of the people that we place get hired full-time. It used to be 100% when we started, but we realized that was too good, and so we lowered our standards. Well, because look, if you're hitting every pitch that you swing at, then you're not swinging enough pitches, right? So we made a conscious effort to lower our standards, and I'm proud to say we probably have the lowest standards in the nation for getting people in. And as far as comparing us to educators, we're not an educator. So we don't care where you get the information. So the fact that there are 5 universities in my hometown that I think are broken, statistically, what I'm saying is that I know that a student going through one of those educational programs statistically has a very low chance of passing our lowest standard in the market. So that's my sort of knock on them, and it's not really their fault, frankly. They have some fundamental problems, but our metric is very simple. Do they get a job or not? That's the only measure that we really look at the end. We've only been around for 1.5 years, so almost everybody's retained so far. But retention's almost irrelevant in computer programming, because once you have a year under your belt, you're marketable. So I don't care if you jump ship from 15 other companies, because you're filling a seat now. It's a round robin. So what LaunchCode is about is net new. And nobody's been tackling that problem. So we are doing it in a sort of weird way, but it's working.
Great. Right here.
Hi, I'm Max Tuckman. I'm the new Executive Director of Teach for America. Thank you for the shout out, Rebecca. Leandro, I heard you say that it doesn't matter what racial, ethnic background or what gender you come from when you're starting up. But if your customers are not 100% white males, how do you get the perspective of the customers that you will probably be serving in your design and in the way that the user experiences your products?
Well, Miami is a diverse city, so I do encourage diversity, and I think working in diversity is one of the assets that we should develop as founders, as entrepreneurs. It's very easy. You have, I'm sure you have friends in this city that can help you out with that, and then you just have to interview the right prospects. Then you start the discovery process. So it's a no-brainer for execution to do so. I believe there is a little bit of barriers still that we are, the Idea Center, are helping to overcome in our own institution. And we have a startup challenge in which 80 teams are competing for a $5,000 grant. I can tell you that probably 95% of those teams are diverse in nature because that's the nature of our institution. So I have good news. The millennials and the younger generations are a lot more open than my own generation.
I think we also need to do some more work, like in the tech space, in making it more inclusive for women. Obviously, there's a lack of representation in that space. My company happens to be all women, but we're not in the tech space. So I think there needs to be some more underlying work trying to make it a more open environment for women in particular in the tech space, but also minorities as well. And I think there's a lot of great programs out there that are trying to do just that, which I think is really cool. But I still think we have a long way to go.
Yeah, I would agree. I think one of the things that heads of tech companies could do is that often if you're at the senior level, you'll look for someone who reminds you of yourself to mentor. But that means that you're going to continue mentoring people who look like you. And often women and people who are minorities don't then get chosen to be menteed or mentored. And so I would encourage people, if you are running something, to look for someone who doesn't look like you and to give them the opportunity to learn.
Right here.
Hi, I'm Christine Conforti, and a power coach and lifestyle strategist. This question's for Rebecca. This conversation's been really focused on how to hire when you want to, but I know your thing is growing great ideas, and I think often you probably see people growing too fast or going too late. So what are some of the triggers or signals you've seen that you know, yes, this is the exact time you should grow?
So I don't know that I have a full scientific answer for how you should know when you're ready to grow, but what I look for when I'm working with organizations to figure out whether this is an organization that I want to invest in personally is, first of all, how much I believe in the leader and their capacity to take on more, but also if they're scalable, are they sustainable at their current scale? Do they have funding to then grow their team? And is there a want and a need that they're seeing that they're not filling yet?
Great. We have time for one more question. Right here.
Hello, I'm Alistair Pragas. I'm a student and a web developer for the FIU Honors College. I'm also part of Stella, stellatech.com. My question is for LaunchCode and WinCode, and I guess all these hackathon coding bootcamp programs. Do you think these programs directly compete with, a conservative 4-year computer science degree, where in a hackathon you build like a mobile or a web app in like 24 to 48 hours, you build things really quickly and you learn skills that you want to learn at your own pace and at your own time?
So I'll repeat the question. How would I compare them? I think they both fit ecosystem niches. So the 4-year degree is very, very valuable. It's how I learned. But I also was highly self-taught as well. What's happened lately is things like Khan Academy and Coursera and these open access courses have flipped the learning equation around, so it's possible for individuals to learn by themselves without the formal credentialing. The problem is that the job market expects the formal credentialing, and so we have to evolve past that. I wasn't willing to wait, so that's why I started LaunchCode, to sort of speed the process, but I think they're both very valuable. And look, the other thing is, sort of the way you phrase the question is really biased, because it sounds like it's an either-or thing. There are students from 4-year institutions that go to hackathons. There are students who, go to 4-year institutions who don't learn anything. So the question is, at the end of the day, can you do the work? And the cool thing about computers is it's really obvious, because the machine or the responds or it doesn't. So when I tell when I tell what the standard of LaunchCode is, I take out my phone, which I've now buttoned into my pocket. So I should take out
Open the
Leandro's
button,
phone.
then you take out your phone.
But I mean, can you make this thing behave? Does it obey you? If it does, we can get you a job anywhere. Now, what's the course to getting that mastery? Well, there are 50 courses. So choose the one that's appropriate for you. At different times of your life, you may want different ones.
You good? All right, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Thank you.